One of the biggest economic myths that just refuses to die is the idea that if we can get people spending more money, somehow the economy magically comes roaring back to life. We've all heard this before, right? Stimulate demand, boost consumer spending, print a little more money. Problem solved. If only economics were that easy, we'd have solved poverty centuries ago. We'd just hand everyone $1 million, print it out of thin air, and call it a day. Funny how that never seems to work. Here's the reality as I see it. Money doesn't create wealth. It never has, and it never will. Money is simply the middleman. It's the tool that makes exchanging real goods and services easier. Murray Rothbard brilliantly made this point. Money itself doesn't bake bread. It doesn't build houses. It doesn't manufacture trucks. It doesn't invent computers. It's what he called dead stock. By itself, it produces absolutely nothing. Think about a neighborhood baker. He spends all morning making fresh loaves of bread. He sells that bread for money, and then he walks over and buys a new pair of boots. Did he really pay for those boots with little green pieces of paper? Not really. He paid for them with the bread he created. The money simply made the exchange possible. And that's a huge distinction that gets lost in modern economics. Ludwig von Mises pointed out that people don't actually want money itself. Nobody wakes up and says, boy, I hope I have exactly $123 bills today. No. What they want is purchasing power. They want what money allows them to buy. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Politicians and central bankers constantly talk about there being, quote, too little money, end quote, in the economy. But according to Austrian economics, that's like saying there's too many inches in a ruler. It misses the point entirely. In a free market, if the quantity of money changes, prices adjust. If there are fewer dollars, each dollar simply buys more. If there are more dollars, each dollar simply buys less. Markets adapt. That's why Mises argued there's never really such thing as an economy having too little or too much money. The market continuously adjusts purchasing power to fit whatever money supply exists. So then, the question is, what actually creates prosperity? Well, it's not printing presses. It's not stimulus packages. It's not quantitative easing. It's not government checks in the mail. Real prosperity comes from production. It comes from people working, saving, investing, inventing, building businesses, buying better tools, improving technology, and creating more goods and services that other people voluntarily want to buy. Consumption doesn't create production. Production makes consumption possible. Now, that's backwards from what we're constantly told. Imagine our baker again. He can eat bread because he baked bread. He can buy boots because he produced something valuable first. His consumption is backed by production. And what happens when government creates new money out of thin air? Suddenly, people are spending without first producing. They're putting the cart before the horse. Austrian economists call this unbacked consumption. Somebody somewhere has to give up real goods even though no additional wealth was actually created. The new money simply redistributes purchasing power from later receivers to earlier receivers. That's why inflation isn't creating wealth, it's reallocating wealth. Now, does money printing sometimes make the economy look healthier? Absolutely. That's what makes it so politically attractive. Certain industries boom after a lot of dollars get printed out of thin air. Employment then rises in favored sectors, asset prices climb, politicians hold press conferences and declare victory, everyone pats themselves on the back. But underneath the surface, something dangerous is happening. Artificially cheap money encourages investments that only appear profitable because interest rates have been pushed below where genuine savings would have placed them. Businesses start projects that look sustainable, but only as long as the monetary faucet stays wide open. Eventually, reality shows up. Savings become depleted. Production can't keep up with all that artificial demand. Projects start failing. Businesses discover customers aren't actually willing or able to support everything that was built during the boom. Then comes the recession. And instead of allowing the economy to liquidate bad investments and reallocate resources towards productive uses, central banks often respond with, you guessed it, even more money printing. It's like trying to cure a hangover by ordering another round at the bar. Sure, it delays the pain for a little while, but eventually the bill comes due. Even worse, as the downturn deepens, banks become increasingly cautious. They don't want to lend to businesses that may not survive. So, despite central banks creating enormous amounts of money, lending often remains weak because genuinely creditworthy borrowers become harder to find. That's why simply expanding the money supply cannot manufacture sustainable growth. Real growth has always come from the same ingredients: production, savings, capital investment, entrepreneurship, and voluntary exchange. Everything else is accounting, everything else is appearances, everything else is political theater. As a libertarian, I think this is one of the most important lessons we can learn. Economies don't become wealthier because governments spend more money or because central banks create more currency. They become wealthier because millions of ordinary people freely cooperate, save for the future, invest in better tools, take entrepreneurial risks, and produce things that improve other people's lives. That's where prosperity comes from, not from the printing press, not from bureaucrats, not from monetary manipulation, just from free people creating real value for one another. And honestly, that's a far more optimistic vision than believing our future depends on a handful of central planners sitting around a conference table deciding how much money the rest of us should have.